Today, we will be talking about design build. Design build is growing in popularity as the preferred mode of project delivery. But the majority of projects today are still design bid build. But as you all know, the largest infrastructure projects are increasingly moving towards design build. We prepare this session because an increasing number of our policyholders, our clients, are running into design build opportunities. And it's not just in the public sector, but in the private sector as well. Our underwriters are fielding more questions about this project delivery mode. So today, we will be talking about design build, some of the newer developments in this area, and how to manage your risks. I will first start by talking about some introductory concepts. I'll then talk about design build structures that you should be aware of. Depending on your risk appetite, your role in a design build arrangement can range from the one taking responsibility for both construction and design, or serving as a sub to a design builder. I'll also talk about progressive design build project delivery, a relatively new form of design build that owners with complex projects are increasingly using, and we're also getting a lot of questions about that. I'll talk about the challenges that design firms face, the issues that you need to be aware of, and how to manage those risks. But before I do all of that, I want to talk about some fundamental legal concepts to set the stage. If you're at all considering design build projects, you have to be very comfortable with these concepts so that you understand the risks and opportunities that you will have in a design build project. So let's get started with that. We just want to be able to talk the same language during this webinar so that we're all on the same page about your legal expectations. At a fundamental level, your obligations to your client and to the public are governed by tort law. And this is really the legal framework of protection that is expected of all design professionals. It's based on something called the standard of care. And if indeed you fail to meet this standard under tort law, you are obligated to make your client whole. So adjacent to tort law, we have contract law expectations. And these are obligations that you're free to enter into with your client. You can change or create rights. You can exceed your normal legal liability. So if you want to perform to a higher standard beyond that is expected of you in the standard of care, you can do that. You can limit or shift your legal liability as you see fit. And as long as both parties, you and the person you're entering into an agreement, agree to this, then that will be enforced in a court of law. So on one hand, you have your tort law standards that governs your obligation, not just your client, but to society at large. And then you have contract law that governs your obligations between you and your client, assuming that both of you enter into these obligations. And in the context of design build, most of your obligations will indeed naturally flow from your contractual agreement to your client. And depending on how you structure that, it is most often your contractual obligations that govern the risks that you have. So when we talk about that standard of care, what courts would look at is, what was your duty and did you meet that standard of care? As we often say, the standard of care is defined as an obligation that you have to practice services in the same way that another professional would have at the same time and under the same circumstances. And if you fail to meet those standards, then you will be held responsible and make the client whole for the damages that are expected. Now, in the context of design build, the issue really is that most of your obligations are governed by your contracts, and your failure to meet your client's expectations, and as we'll talk a little bit later, this is oftentimes, in the case of design firms, your contractor it's always difficult to ascertain exactly what it is that the harm is that is governed by negligence law. If you fail to meet that standard of care, typically it's the assessment as well. Did the building fail? Did something not perform as expected because you were negligent? But in this case, oftentimes the issues that arise are like, well, did you fail to meet the duty and then fail to perform, to provide documents on time, which then impacted the contractor's ability to complete the project. So you're looking at negligence concepts, but at the same time, most of the duties relate to the duties to your client. So this area is still being developed from a legal standpoint, and it makes resolving design build claims fairly difficult. And because we don't quite yet know, truthfully, what that standard of care should be. For example, when you're preparing preliminary drawings for the contractor to price the project in order to win the job. Uh, people call those drawings 30% completion to completed drawings. But what should that standard be? And what is reasonable under those circumstances? So in a lot of ways, the risks that you face are still being worked out about what is reasonable under these circumstances. And then, of course, you have your breach of contract claims. And this is oftentimes what you will be facing from your design builder clients. And courts would look to see, well, did a valid contract exist? Was there an agreement? What was the consideration? What did you all promise each other? And then did one party fail to perform as promised? And that is the element of a breach of contract claim. And indeed, in a design build environment, these types of claims can be very, very complex because there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of warranties, as we'll see. And the breach of contract claims are folded into those. So it is essential that you understand exactly what is it that you promised your client, oftentimes the design builder, and what your obligations are. And we'll talk about those shortly. And then finally, in terms of legal concepts, obviously you have to know exactly what a warranty obligation is. And if indeed you make a promise about a project or service time, cost or result, and the other party had a right to rely on it, and they actually relied on it, and it proved to be false, then you may face a breach of warranty claim because you made an express promise that something would happen based on your activities. The other party relies on it, and it didn't happen. Then you have a breach of warranty claim. This is very typical in the construction arena, where the contractor, the builder, actually does promise as part of the bargain for exchange that they will warrant that the construction will happen, that the completion date will be met, and that indeed the client can rely on these warranties being met. And if they don't, that they will make the client whole. So that's very typical in the construction arena. It's not typical in a design firm providing services, which oftentimes typically say, hey, we will perform in a manner that meets that standard of care. The issue that you have, though, is that in a design build project, and we'll look at the structure shortly and compare it with design bid build, is that you often have these warranty obligations that are flowing throughout the contract and that you need to be wary of so that you can protect your interests accordingly. All right, that's it for the legal side of things. Let's talk about the traditional project delivery format that most design firms are familiar with, and that is the design bid build environment. In a design bid build environment, what you have are two separate contracts. The first contract is between the owner and the design team. and the designer says, we will design the facility, the project, whatever it may be, a capital asset of some sort, typically. We will provide interpretation of construction documents, and we will help you, the owner, as your agent, administer that construction contract. The owner obviously comes up with a program and site that governs what they want. They will take your construction documents in their contract with the contractor and make that part of the contract to the contractor. And they will tell the contractor, here's the construction documents. We will pay you, and you will take responsibility for the time and cost of construction, means and methods, job site safety, and so on, and you will give us that completed facility. Now, here's an important concept that oftentimes that comes into play in a design bid build environment that doesn't play an important role in design build. It's called the Spearman Doctrine. And this is a doctrine, a legal doctrine that when the owner gives the contractor a set of construction documents, that they are giving them an implied warranty that there's enough information in these documents for the contractor to bid and price and complete the project, and that the contractor is entitled to rely on it. If indeed there isn't enough information or there is insufficient information, then any additional costs that the contractor has to pay out is the owner's responsibility. And this comes from a 1918 United States Supreme Court case called United States versus Spearman, in which contractor, Spearman, contracted with the federal government to build a dry dock in the Brooklyn Naval Yard. And he, as part of this, his job was to relocate a sewer line that run underneath the pad for the dock. And this was done according to the plans and specifications provided by the owner, the federal government. And a year after the work had been completed, a dam and a connecting sewer that had not been identified or was known about failed, and it caused flooding in the area excavated for the dry dock. The government subsequently filed suit, claiming that Spearman had failed to properly investigate site conditions. The contractor countered that he had relied upon the information provided to him by the government, and it did not show the existence of the dam, and it was reasonable for him to rely on these documents. And the Supreme Court basically agreed with the contractor, and that the contractor is indeed bound to build according to plans and specifications, and they're not responsible for the consequences of defects in the plans and specs. So that means that the owner is on the hook. There is an implied warranty that they give to the contractor when they give them the construction documents. You as a design team, are just held to that standard of care. And you may well have met that standard of care, but the construction documents may not be sufficient. That gap is on the owner. And so in response to some of these challenges and continued litigation between the owner and the contractor over the years, that's where design build project delivery developed from that context. And it's important that you understand that. And from the owner's standpoint, they're like, okay, well, we don't really want to deal with, construction defects or insufficient information in the design drawings and administer that. We just want single point of responsibility. It's faster, the thought processes, and more cost effective to have a single point of responsibility. The owner is concerned about the result, not the process. And the thinking is that they will focus on problem solving, have both the design team and the contractor part of the same entity so that they are going to incentivize to problem solve and not assign blame for problems. And the structure looks something like this. The owner in a design build project will select a design build entity, and you can set up that design build entity in any number of ways, and we'll talk about that. Oftentimes, they will engage prior to that process with a design build consultant who will provide them with some criteria that provides them, the design build entity, with some upfront information about what is required. Where's the facility? What are the capacity requirements? Where's the site? Any number of things that relate to the project that is prepared by that design build consultant who operates outside of the design build entities, providing services to the owner. That design build entity then prepares a bid based on those bridging documents that the design build consultant prepares, and engages with specialists, suppliers, subcontractors, subconsultants, as the case may be, to come up with a bid. And then based on the qualification, could be a low bid environment, it could be qualifications, or you know, a mixture of those two, then the owner selects that design build entity to go ahead and do the project. The upside, obviously, for the owner is that there's a single point of responsibility for the owner. And the liability that the owner has for design is diminished. Thinking is that there's fewer changes and claims that result in less litigation between owner and contractor. And there's potentially time savings because there's only one procurement process, and you can conceivably do some fast tracking as well as the solution comes on board. The downside is that the owner risks losing control of the actual design solution, because the advantage of fast tracking is that, hey, you're giving elements of design control to the design build entity. And the other downside is that obviously there are claims that may happen between the design firm and the contractor. Obviously, as we'll see, if the design build entity is indeed a design firm, they have to think about matters that relate to, am I licensed to do general contracting activities in the state? Is that reasonable for me to take on that responsibility? Are there bonding requirements in a public project that I will be able to meet? We'll talk about that. It's a totally different animal, and this has been design build is certainly not new. It's been growing, as I said at the beginning, but it's for a lot of firms who haven't done this before, it's certainly something new. When we just briefly about claims, when we look at design build claims in our program, it's difficult for us to say, to provide a straight comparison with our design bid build projects, because quite frankly, there's a lot more design bid build claims that arise, and the sample size is much, much smaller for design build projects. We do have firms who routinely do design build, but from what we can tell, the consensus is that the frequency for design build type projects is lower than when compared to design bid build, so we don't get as many claims, probably because these issues tend to get worked out before it develops into a claim. But when there is a claim, they tend to be higher in severity than a design bid build project. So it really depends on the project. It depends on the firm's experience. So it's up to you all to gauge your comfort level with these type of projects, but certainly it is something that more firms are asking questions about. So let's talk briefly about what happens when you're serving as that owner's consultant. You're not part of a design build entity, but you are indeed serving as a consultant for the owner. You're assisting the owner in developing design criteria, and the guidance that's provided to you is that it shouldn't be too detailed or restrict the ability of the design builder to develop alternative solutions. The whole idea is that you want the design builder to use their expertise and their smarts to go out there and provide a solution that works. And so you want to give them enough information, but it shouldn't be too detailed. If you do take over the design, and the subsequent design builder is obligated to follow that by their contract, then what happens is that it could open up the owner to those types of spearant type doctrines that we talked about, because a court may well look at the drawings and say, well, owner, you actually gave the solution to the contractor. They were obligated to follow it, and therefore it's because of that information that the design builder incurred these additional costs, and therefore you're responsible for them. So it's always, as the owner's consultant, you have to be mindful of not opening up your owner to those types of claims by being too prescriptive. You could still have significant risk here if you don't carefully define your role and limit your responsibility. So let's look at some design build structures that kind of flesh this out a little bit more. You could have a designer-led design build. And you would think that this would be the domain of large firms, but we're actually seeing smaller firms with expertise in a particular sector uh, being willing to take the lead. And, with those additional risks come the potential for greater reward. But we're seeing that, and it is not as uncommon as you might think. If indeed your risk appetite is such that you're comfortable taking the lead, it could work. We see often that the design firm will set up a separate entity that takes on the design build contracts. The practical challenges are oftentimes related to if it's a public project, bonding capability, right? If you're supposed to provide a performance bond, sureties typically want to see significant balance sheets to issue a performance bond. And if you don't have that, or in addition to that, they often require personal guarantees from the owners of the firm. So, a lot of architects and engineers are leery of putting themselves out there to that extent. So that could be a bar. Again, I looked at our case files. I saw one or two. But what I did see in this particular scenario is that the damages really tend to be large if you are indeed the lead. What you often see as allegations are delay claims by the owner that often lead to substantial damages, as well as allegations of both defective design and construction. And because of the complexity of these claims, they often settle for close to the available policy limits if all you're relying on is the practice policy. At least that's my impression from looking at the very few claims that have settled in our program. And the other thing that that you should realize is that because of the complexity, and most of these claims are actually settled, they're negotiated out. The pressure to settle these claims quickly is pretty high, because it can easily, exhaust available policy limits. So it is indeed a much more riskier endeavor. But again, for firms that are successfully completing this and have the subject matter expertise and are comfortable taking on that role, it obviously opens up a lot more revenue streams that you can take advantage of. And then, of course, there's the joint venture, and that presents challenges of its own. In this case, you join in a venture with the design firm and the contractor. Again, you have to be aware of the legal responsibilities that you own. You have something called joint and several liability. That means that if the entity is indeed responsible and your partner can't meet their end of the obligation, then with joint and several liability, you, the design firm, are not only responsible for your portion, but as far as the owner is concerned, they can go after you for the entire thing, for the entire scope of responsibility, because you presented yourself as a joint venture. So obviously, it's essential that number one, you have an agreement that spells out exactly what the responsibility is between you all, and that each party, typically the way you structure it is that each party will be responsible for their own negligence, obviously. But beyond that, you need to be able to select somebody who can stand behind their obligations. And obviously, in a joint venture with construction responsibilities, if your joint venture partner can't meet their end of the bargain, then that could potentially leave you on the hook. Joint venture uh, venture, when you're in a joint venture, you also have a fiduciary responsibility to your partner, which means that you have to oftentimes look out for their interests. So that goes beyond the typical arm's length commercial relationship that you have with a partner or with a prime or a sub. So that opens up another set of responsibilities that you need to be aware of. Again, your joint venture agreement, oftentimes, you do require sophisticated legal counsel to review these. One of the things, we come at it from claims. How does the joint venture agreement address disputes and pursue claims? How will you resolve owner-related claims? Who's going to take the lead? And what's the role of each party? All of these things certainly need to be addressed in your joint venture agreement. Of course, by far the most common setup for design firms, is a contractor-led design build. And when we talk about managing the risk later in the presentation, this is for the most part what we're assuming. You as a design firm will take the information provided by the owner and the owner's consultant and prepare a preliminary design that will allow the contractor to prepare a construction bid, right? The expectation is that there's enough information provided by you in this stage when you're preparing your bid to allow the contractor to prepare competitive bid. Oftentimes in this industry, folks use things like 30% design drawings to get you to that stage where an experienced contractor will be able to do reasonable construction estimate, do the quantity takeoffs, and put in a competitive bid. And we'll talk about some of those challenges shortly. If the bid is successful, then the design team will complete the design and move it forward. The pros for this is that obviously you have somebody who knows construction, presumably, doing the scheduling, the coordination, and the procurement expertise. And they have the ability to tap qualified subcontractors. Very natural for them to, come up with bonds and any other administrative requirements. The con is that, especially if you're dealing with a contractor who's coming at it from a traditional design bid build environment, is that they have a low bid, hard money risk mentality, that they're insensitive to design quality, that, especially for newer design firms that are delving into this, that are still concerned about that, that could be a culture clash. And obviously, a contractor may, if they perceive you as just the typical trade, and don't quite recognize that your responsibility, not just for design, but also for health, safety, welfare, may impose obligations on you greater than that of a typical trade, that could be a source of friction. So those are the structures that we have talked about to date, but in the last 5 to 8 years, there's been a new variation of a contractor-led design build that, again, we're getting questions about. And this is called progressive design build. Just to recap briefly, the traditional method is a design bid build where you have two separate contracts. And then we have the owner design build relationship. And progressive design build tries to bridge this situation where the owner actually engages with a design builder who has a design team already in place and pays for their services, so that as the design builder is is providing solutions, that the owner has meaningful input as the solution progresses. You not only have the design builder and the sub consultants and the specialty subcontractors, you also have the owner involved, and this is structured in the relationship. Uh, this is intended to address their concern, their being the owner's concern, that the design solutions that were being provided to them didn't quite meet their needs because too much had been given over to the design builder in the initial stages. And it allows the owner to be more involved with the design options. With a progressive design build, the team is involved during the earliest stages of the owner's project development. It ensures that the owner is part of the project team when design solutions are being developed. And ideally, you now have greater collaboration between owner, the constructor, and design team. So one of the unique features about progressive design build, at least as envisioned by the document drafters, is that the initial selection of the design builder is almost always based on qualification. So the owner goes out there and says, hey, we worked with this entity before. We want to, or they ask for a request for qualifications, and they select the design builder based on qualifications. And the idea is to get a partnership going. The owner doesn't know initially how much the final project cost is going to be. They haven't gone through the capital budgeting process. So there's some uncertainty there, but they do know they want something, and they don't want to rely solely on bridging documents. So during this phase, and the design builder is being paid for their time, obviously, there's no limits on the solutions. It's a collaborative process, and the design builder is not locked into a fixed price. During the preliminary stage, there's activities like permitting, conceptual design, property acquisition, geotechnical investigations, and then more detailed design and construction planning. After that preliminary stage is done, the design builder will present a proposal for completion stage services. And during this process, they being the owners, getting more progressive estimates of what the solution is going to be. And then at the completion stage is design completion and construction related activities. So the owner's involved. Oftentimes, especially with complex processes like water treatment plants or wastewater treatment plants, the owner has the ability to select the equipment suppliers that they prefer or that they have experience with, and they can direct that. And they can actually go ahead and place those orders for those long lead items. And because they are difficult to price, it's collaborative. The thinking is it's open book. And so there's less need for contingencies because there are more realistic pricing assumptions built into the planning phase. You don't have a design builder who's being deliberately aggressive in hopes of winning the project. It's actually more open book. And for complex projects that often are difficult to price, this could be an excellent solution. There's progressive estimates that keep the owner informed and support informed scope adjustment decisions. And the owner, if they're not quite sure about the numbers that they're getting, can always use third parties to verify the cost that they're getting. If you can't reach agreement on the phase 2 phase services, or if procurement statutes require that the project be competitively bid, then the owner has an off-ramp to proceed with another design builder. And that's where you have a more detailed set of drawings. The owner has a more realistic set of expectations. They can plan their capital budgeting accordingly. And it allows for better capital budget management for the owner. So those are the advantages. And for the consultant, I think there's quite a few advantages. You have more direct involvement with the owner. You're working closely with a design builder that's selected primarily on qualifications, and you can learn more about the actual construction challenges because you're not there just to prepare that preliminary set of drawings to allow bidding, but you're involved from the beginning, and so you can see how the design builder thinks. And oftentimes you have that ability to interact meaningfully with the owner. You're not treated as that lower tier subcontractor who's never seen nor heard. So again, just briefly, that this is where the progressive design build delivery method, how it develops, some of the thinking behind it. EJCDC in the 2016 design build documents issued a progressive design build document. If you're interested, you can certainly look that up. The Design Build Institute of America, DBIA, also has progressive design build primers and documents if you want to do further research. I know that the AIA Contract Documents Committee is also looking actively into developing these progressive design build documents. So, you know, it's going to be, I think, more prevalent in the coming years, and it may well be something that your firm will see more of and would like to be involved with, depending on the sectors that you work in. So I think I've set the stage now for the structures of design build. What we're going to do now is talk about some of the risks that are unique to design build. And it's essential that you get a handle on these things so that your comfort level and your ability to take on these types of projects is enhanced. So for those firms that have not worked in design build, you should realize that, you know, in your core, in your DNA, you're often thinking that, hey, I'm there as the owner's agent. I'm there to represent the owner's needs, especially during construction, so that I can protect the owner as the design professional. That is not going to happen in a design build environment, especially in the most common scenario where you're a sub to the design builder. You're often restricted from communicating directly with the owner. And a lot of the documents will tell you that unless it's a public health, safety, welfare issue, you are restricted from communicating directly with the owner. There's also many different contracting scenarios, right? And so the complexity is there. And so depending on your risk appetite, you may choose to set up different structures to go after these opportunities. If you want to play a lead role in a design build, and certainly, like I said, there are firms that do that, you would have to do some research into what kind of licensing requirements there are to do some contracting activities, depending on your state. Of course, you can rely on subbing that out to responsible parties who have those licenses, but again, you need to make sure that you are in compliance with your state's regulations. One thing that we'll talk about in a little more detail is that we often see a risk of an enhanced standard of care when it comes to design build, and you need to be cognizant of that. The ownership of drawings could be an issue that needs to be addressed, especially, you know, oftentimes what you have is a teaming agreement that says, okay, let's team up. We will work towards preparing a proposal. But you want to make sure that if the contractor is successful, for example, that they don't choose to ditch you and move on to a lower price design firm after you've done the work. So one way to protect yourself is to make sure that the ownership of drawings is, you know, what the contractor has as a very limited license to use it to prepare the bid and nothing more. That's one way to protect your interests. And then there's the risk of implied warranty of design. And obviously you're sharing construction risk, which could be new, which is new for most design firms. And as I said, this is a cultural shift. You, as the design builder, has total responsibility to owner for design and construction. And for a lot of firms, stepping up, that could be an uncomfortable role for many designers. What's uncomfortable is the lack of client contact and that the fact that the design builder has final authority. So what we see most often are flow down clauses that apply to you, and because you are in a contract with a design builder that has warranted the design or is guaranteeing code compliance. And the challenge for you is that things like code compliance often rely on installation and adherence to quality standards by the contractor. So whether the completed facility meets code is not necessarily related to the services that you provide. Another challenge that you often see is that the design builder may want less than full construction drawings to limit cost. Oftentimes, after the job is won, the design builder may say, well, we will use a specialty subcontractor to come up with the design, and we won't need you to develop that portion. So that's always a challenge because number one, you still have coordination responsibilities, and the subcontractor may not be able to complete the design adequately, or you need to be assured that they indeed have those capabilities. Your construction administration services are usually very limited. Depending on how the design builder has set it up, you may be doing submittal reviews, responding to questions and inquiries, sign off at substantial completion, and then certification to government authorities. But your involvement in the actual construction may not be as robust as when you're acting as an agent for the owner. And so you have a limited ability to provide the best solution for the owner because cost is oftentimes the driving factor in the decisions. So you have to essentially find a partner that you can trust. And that's oftentimes what it comes down to. Firms that do design build oftentimes are very picky about the entities with whom they partner with, about whom they're willing to enter into this relationship, because your cultures have to work well together. And if you worked well in a design bid build environment, then that's a natural way of progressing the relationship to do design build projects where the firm or the contractor understands where you're coming from. So what do? You want to limit liability for flow down claims. The contractor may well have these broad responsibilities for warranties and assuring certain outcomes, but you don't want to be in a position of being responsible for those just because you have a subcontract relationship. You should be able to carve out your responsibility and clearly define that scope of work that we talked about, right? You need to make sure that you clarify the services that you'll be providing. For example, design builders will often bring in a mechanical sub to do both the design and construction of the HVAC system. And you need to be upfront about what your scope will be and clarify that these specialty subs will have sole responsibility for their design solution. That often means also requiring that they carry the necessary insurance. The other issue that we often see is your client, the design builder, settling up any claims that they have with the owner and assigning their ability, the design builder's ability to go after you directly to the owner and walking away. Um, this will leave you facing claims directly by the owner, and these become very difficult to resolve because the entity that is more likely responsible, the contractor, has settled out and moved on. So you want to protect yourself from these scenarios in your contracts by making sure that they require there's a waiver of direct claims by the owner. You can obviously explain the risks by offering to provide additional services. That way, you know, the contractor has the benefit of your expertise and hopefully doesn't have to rely on contingencies because the additional services provide them the ability to provide a more realistic bid. You need to think about what that you know, negligence standard should be, what makes sense, and be aware that some design build contracts may hold the design professionals to a higher standard. Uh, be very careful about that. Because you know, uh, here's an example. This, although it's from 1999, this language, we still see it when we're reviewing contracts, and it's from the DBIA 540, and it states the typical standard of care at the beginning, but and then it says that if the design build agreement contains specifically identified performance standards, then you will agree that all services shall be performed to achieve such standards. This obviously opens you up to a much greater standard that is present in the design builder agreement. So you should insist that you use a version that's in the 2010, right? A typical standard of care. That's the type of exposure that is more reasonable that you should insist on. Design build in today's environment, especially in the last few years, has been really very challenging. There's it's true that the pre-award pricing is aggressive and highly competitive, and it's led to situations where the design builder is relying on your preliminary services to prepare these bids. And once that's locked in, then there's not really the ability to pursue more funds. And this leads to fundamental challenges. Because it's an aggressive situation, there's inadequate contingency funds oftentimes into the bid because the contractor wants to win the job. And so once they win the job, they're not able to seek additional funds because the owner and design builder have locked that in. And so let's say you have something like a differing site condition where you know, your initial documents provide some preliminary information, but it's not comprehensive. And during design, you find out, let's say, that there's something that's slightly different that requires a different solution that requires more cost. That is indeed a very difficult situation in a design build environment because the owner's attitude is that, hey, we've given you a job, you said you could do this, and that differing site condition that you run into, that's part of the risk that you assumed. In a design bid build environment, the contractor would be able to seek those additional funds and it wouldn't be a source of friction between that involves the design team, right? So you need to think about what does how do I go about going about these opportunities? you need a teaming agreement. And the teaming agreement simply puts into the place that when we pursue this opportunity, this is what we're doing. We are agreeing on what the endeavor will look like. So you need to protect your interests in your teaming agreements with the design builder, right? You want to protect against the possibility of being replaced by the subsequent firm. One way to do that is to clearly identify what the relationship agreement is going to be like. Don't leave that till the end after you've won the job. Spell out exactly what your subcontract relationship and terms and conditions are, and attach it as an appendant, as an attachment to your teaming agreement. You need to think about what the cost of preparing the proposal, who's going to bear that? Is this part of your development cost, or is an element of it going to be covered by the builder? And how detailed is it going to be? And who is going to pay for that? So that really needs to be spelled out and be clear. If you want to use it as part of your pursuit costs and sink some costs, that's fine, but make sure that indeed the reward at the end is reflective of the cost that you've put into it. And here's some standard language that you can certainly use as a resource to try to protect yourself, and more importantly, to make sure that the design builder understands that that there may be that it's based off of known information that is available to you, and that there may be additional costs imposed when the when additional design is done, and that the contractor will be solely responsible for all pre-award quantity takeoff based on the design professional's pre-award bid effort. So it's important that when you're looking at these projects that you structure the relationship correctly. It depends on a lot of different things. Complexity and size of the project, the jurisdiction of the project, including the licensing requirements for both contractors and design professionals, insurance and bonding requirements, and then your preferred allocation of risk. And that is going to be specific to you and your firm and your risk profile and how comfortable you are with being the lead on the project. So once you've won the project, you need to successfully manage the scope of services. And if indeed it becomes apparent that the job is going to cost more, who bears that risk? And this is where a lot of issues come into play, because it's the contractor's ability to get paid for that. If oftentimes the preliminary design drawings that you did to win the job, when that's developed, you need more money for any number of reasons. In this environment, it could be material costs, supply chain issues, any number of issues. So from a builder's standpoint, they need to be made whole for that. They need to at least be able to get paid for that in order for them to make the same profit margin that they assumed. So hopefully you have a builder who has the ability to has the right contract in place that allows them to have a cost escalation clause with the owner that allows them to go back and say, hey, owner, situation has changed. Therefore, you're getting the benefit of this facility. We need to negotiate an uptake because it is just not commercially reasonable for us to continue. This is where having the right team member can make a difference, right? Because your sophisticated partner will not immediately look to you, hopefully, to say, oh, okay, we're we're locked into this price, and you as a design professional are going to be responsible because it's your inability to do the preliminary design, which is by definition limited, that has led to this scenario. So those are the types of issues that often come up. Obviously, if indeed you have not met that standard of care and the quantity takeoffs are not accurate because of your negligence, that is certainly a case that the builder may make. And your perspective is that, hey, based on the limited information and the limited amount of time, we just simply did meet the standard of care, and this is a risk that you, a builder, took on. So that's the nature of the potential disputes that is developing in this area. Your challenge obviously is that meeting that standard of care. You obviously still have responsibility for health, safety, and welfare based on your licensing laws. And you need to determine your preferred allocation of risk. That also depends on selecting the right partner and being comfortable with that role. So identify the right partner, choose the right time to negotiate your subcontract agreement. That oftentimes means when you're looking at your teaming agreement. And from firms who have done this successfully, you should explore possible partnerships and establish working relationships with folks you have worked with in the past, and reach out to people whom you trust and you think you can work with before the opportunity rolls along, so that the relationships are in place and you can focus solely on pursuing the opportunity instead of evaluating the partner at that time. Obviously, one option is for the owner or you to pursue the potential for a project-specific insurance policy to cover these risks. There are, depending on the project and project size, that's a possibility that you should explore with your broker. And that's one way of managing risks that at least doesn't expose your practice policy. So thank you for attending. I hope you got some benefit out of this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out through the normal channels, and I will do my best to answer the questions. Finally, remember to fill out the survey that will be coming your way shortly, and you should also be able to download your certificate. And then finally, I just want to mention that we do have the, for our insureds, this is a reminder that a lot of information is available to you at the Victor School of Risk Management. Please be aware that we have the new Victor Contract Sifter. We have an online platform for continuing education, and lots of resources that are available to you that you can take advantage of. Thank you again, and that's it for the presentation today.